Welcome to Pencils and Lipstick. This is a podcast for indie authors. I'm Kat Caldwell, novelist, short story writer, and book coach. Here on Pencils and Lipstick, we're obsessed with all things story, and it is my goal to bring you the writing tips that you need to make your novel come to life. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pencils and Lipstick. I'm Kat Caldwell, and this is episode 256. And today I am speaking with Stacy Juba, my friend, and we're talking about editing. As Stacy says, she has been editing for a long time in her life. She started writing when she was really young, and she got her first book published when she was 18, which is unbelievable. And it's so cool. That book is called Offsides, and it is still like selling well. She knows what she's doing. She's been editing for 12 years. She does developmental editing. So that is mostly looking over the story structure and the character structure. And, disclaimer, she edits some of my books. She's doing the historical romances with me, and she is a great, great editor. So we've been friends for a long time. When her book editing blueprint course came out, she dared to come on Pencils and Lipstick when I was like 5 episodes into the podcast. So I've always appreciated that. And I've just always loved talking to her about all the things that she knows because she's very, very knowledgeable. If you are new here, know that this podcast is mostly for writers. I talk to authors, I talk to people who work with authors, I talk to people in the publishing industry, and most of us are sort of looking at the indie industry because that is where I publish in. But we talk a lot about traditional publishing as well. In fact, Stacy goes into kind of what is required of traditional published authors these days, which is a little bit different than when she started out. If you are new here, please subscribe. If you guys haven't given a review before, but you've been here for a while or you're new, reviews always help. Getting new reviews will help sort of tell the algorithm that people are still listening. If you want to see me or my guests, you can find us on YouTube at Pencils and Lipstick. You can pretty much see the last year, I think. I'm pretty sure it's about a year's worth of actual video, and you can see us and you can see how my office has changed. It's like constantly evolving. Yeah, you can see the beautiful green color of my office. So we're talking about editing today because I think it's one of those things that, especially in the indie world, there are lots of podcasts and interviews with well-established authors that might give the impression to new writers that editing is not always necessary. And I just kind of want to burst that bubble. I talk about it semi-often here on the show, and I talk about it semi-often in my newsletter and on Substack, but editing is not really an option until you are pretty well established, almost until you're like only writing and doing nothing else would be my opinion. But even then, it is always good to get a professional to look at your work. To look at it from an editor's point of view and from a reader's point of view, it will just make your work stronger. As we say in the interview, there are some people that are just so super talented that they can kind of get away with not using an editor, but that is usually, even then, that is usually when they have been writing for a long time. And so as you're listening to podcasts and being, encouraged and uplifted and, to keep writing, and these writers that are putting out a book a month, and maybe that overwhelms you a bit, and just understand that that is a different dynamic of writing that you might not be at. And so I talked to Stacy about, her experience having edited for 12 years now, developmental editing, what mistakes she sees writers make. And then we talk a lot about her course, Book Editing Blueprint. I think that you really should check it out. You should at least go to Shortcuts for Writers, which I have the link in the show notes below. Disclaimer, it's an affiliate link, but you don't pay any more, and I get a little tip at the end if you end up buying anything, but at least go and grab her Looks and Gazes worksheet. It is a great place to start to maybe open your eyes to the little mistakes that we make as writers, right? How to strengthen your writing, how to make it even better each time, each iteration of a manuscript or each book that you write. I'm coming out with my sixth and seventh book this year. I'm still using editors. I just think I've gotten to the point where I really appreciate the extra eyes on the story, how it can be strengthened, how they can get my brain working, how Stacy's questions on my manuscript get me thinking about how much stronger I can make the characters or the plots. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. If you don't know Stacy, she got engaged at Epcot theme park and spent part of her honeymoon at Disneyland Paris, which is so wonderful. It's awesome. She has had novels ranked as number 5 and number 11 in the Nook store and number 30 on Amazon Kindle paid list. That is a difference. Stacy's first novel, Face Off, about twin brothers competing on the hockey rink for their father's approval, was originally published when she was 18 years old, under her maiden name even, Stacy Drumtra, and has been reissued for a new generation of readers. And then she released a sequel to that called Offsides 26 years later after the publication of Face Off. When she's not visiting theme parks with her family or writing about them, Stacy helps authors to strengthen their manuscripts through her editing and online course business, Shortcuts for Writers, which again, I will have the link to in the show notes below. But without further ado, let's talk to Stacy about editing. Hello, Stacy Juba. It's so nice to talk to you.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
If listeners don't know, I think we talk almost every week. So this will be an easy chat for us. And we talk a lot about like your business is a lot of you're a personal like editorial editor, and then you have courses and things like that. So how long have you been editing books? Like, or editing in general? Because you were a journalist, right?
Yeah. I used to be a newspaper reporter, and then I freelanced for a lot of years and did a lot of newsletters like for clients. Um,
Oh,
and then I started editing books, I want to say about 12 years ago.
oh my gosh, that's crazy. So, but your whole life, like as a newspaper reporter, do you have to kind of self-edit? Do you have to make sure that you're sending in clean copy?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where I think that helped to train me because you have to do it on deadline, and
Okay.
sometimes you're doing it at like midnight. You're going to cover a meeting, then you have to go back and write the story, and then so you just kind of learn to write tight, and you work with editors, there's copy editors and editor in chief, and you kind of get to know what their feedback's going to be, so you try to
Avoid it.
before, yeah, you try to like predict what they're going to say before they say it.
Right. So the cleaner that you send in the copy, kind of like the better, the easier it goes for you, I guess, in that life.
Yeah, because sometimes the editors would make good improvements, but other times they were on deadline too and editing a bunch of stories. So then if they had to do too much to your story, then it just might you might not be happy with it.
Yeah, true. Well, sometimes I read news articles these days and I'm like, they needed an editor.
Yeah.
So I wonder so did you study like how do you know all this grammar? Because I know you do editorial like developmental editing. So I think I said editorial editing before, didn't I? So developmental editing is more like story, and we'll get into that. But did you study like in college the proper grammar, which seems to be lacking a little bit in
No,
some of our
I studied exercise physiology.
Oh, did you? So you're like the typical person that's like, I don't know where a comma goes. Isn't that the stereotype of
No, so because I was always interested in health and fitness, and so I
yeah.
was a health writer for a lot of years. And
Oh, cool.
I incorporate some of that into my courses, like my organized
Yeah.
course about being balanced and healthy. But I think I've always loved to read. I kind of self trained, I did take creative writing classes. I've taken
Hmm.
a lot of writing courses over the years, nothing specifically on grammar, but I was writing stories in third grade and
So you
reading
just naturally,
just naturally. Yeah, I remember
huh.
like reading, like writing textbooks. There was like this bookstore near my house, and it was an old bookstore, this old mill. And I remember going there and going to the writing reference section. I was probably like fourth grade, fifth grade, and I would get college textbooks on writing and
You
creative
would
writing,
not.
and I would yeah, I would do the exercises in them, like so I so
That's
I
so
just
funny.
really been doing that since I was a kid and just reading
Okay.
a lot. And so I mean I'm not a grammar expert. I'm not a copy editor. I don't do like straight copy editing because
Right. It's
I instinctively really kind of know where a comma goes, but I couldn't tell you
yeah, yeah, yeah.
grammatical rule, like why. I'm more like the developmental and the line editing, like the more creative
Yeah.
part of it. But I'm pretty good at grammar, and I
I trust you.
yeah, I use pro writing aid and Grammarly too to run things through that.
I mean, that's the least you can do. Let's not like, so the least, so you were a reporter, but you also then went into writing fiction. So you're a fiction writer, you're a developmental editor, you have amazing courses for writers. So now you're like this kind of writing guru for writers, especially indie writers. And we'll have links below. But like when you've been editing probably mostly like I don't know, mostly indie writers, or I guess 12 years ago it would have been people looking to be in traditionally published, right?
Yeah, I've had a mix. I'd say mostly
Yeah.
indie writers, but I've had some writers that work with that had like contracts with publishing companies. And I think a lot of beginner writers don't realize that even authors under contract with that have like a 3 book deal with a major publisher, a lot of times they will hire a freelance editor first because the big publishing companies aren't they don't do as much editing as they used to in the past. And
Really?
yeah, so 'cause, I mean, a lot of the companies have like merged and they are staff. So, if you're like a best-selling author, that you know they'll they'll work with obviously they'll work with you and everything. And but those that might just have their first book contract or 3 book deal and they're still not established with them, they're still kind of nervous. They want to keep that contract. They want to keep the publisher happy, and they a lot of times they will hire a freelance editor first before they send it to their editor at the publishing company. So that's
Wow.
as
Okay.
strong as
So wait, so
possible.
this is a writer who has
Mhm.
sold the idea basically of their books.
Yeah.
And maybe even like they've read a couple chapters or maybe a whole draft. But then do they know, like, does their agent or somebody tell them, like, make sure to get this edited? Or is this like a learning process where this traditional writer is like, oh, I better get this edited? Like
I
how
think
do
it's
they
more
figure out? Because I think most people think they want to go traditional so they don't have to pay for an
right.
editor.
I
Like,
think it's more of like learning, or like, oh gosh, I've got this deal now, and now this is my chance, and I don't want to blow it. So
okay.
I want to send. I know that the editor, the publishing company, is going to have their own feedback and everything, but I want it to be as strong as possible before they even see it, so they know I'm easy to work with and that I write.
Well, that's smart.
Yeah. So I've worked with some writers like that.
Like, could you get axed if it's not, if you kind of send in a book? Like, would they ever do that where you kind of are set to be published, but they end up not like, or like the book is a mess and they go, no, it's not worth, I don't know. Has that ever been, has
I
that ever happened?
I don't know. I think there's something about that in the contract.
Okay. Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Like I remember, I'm trying to think, but I was traditionally published with my first book, and they gave you like they gave you an advance against royalties, but they gave it like half before, as you're writing, and then half after they like the other half after they'd accepted it.
Okay.
So I can't remember what all you know, the legal ins and outs were, but
Right. I
um,
wonder. I mean,
yeah,
I would assume that they've read some sort of pages, but I mean, I don't know about you, but I've received sample pages for somebody who wanted some editing done, and there were no capitalization and there was no paragraph, like indentation. Like there was no, it
yeah,
was just,
I've
and
seen that kind of thing.
I I had to say no because it was just a headache to look like, oh, that's so much work. Honestly, that would require a bigger payment, I think, because what you're doing is you're trying to parse through just words at that point. Like, so what's the worst condition that you have found a book in where you were like that you wrote back to the writer and was like, I suggest you do this, and once you do that, you come back and we'll look at the story.
Yeah, I've had some writers that that were real beginners, but they also had trouble with grammar and punctuation.
Mm,
They just loved telling stories, and they had stories they wanted to tell, but they just didn't. It didn't come naturally to them. So it was like what you said, like no paragraphs, run-on sentences, like a lot of lack of punctuation. Um, like just your scenes where it's not really a scene. It's just it's like they're
yeah.
thinking, or the you don't know, like the dialogue isn't punctuated. And it's just hard, makes it hard to follow.
Oh,
So
the dialogue. I didn't even get
yeah,
that part. Yeah,
so
that
it's
would be
just
hard.
so I think when there's so many things like that wrong with it, it can be hard to follow. So like in those cases, I kind of so we have to kind of work on the grammar to some degree, even though not the copy editing comes later after developmental
Usually.
editing usually, but we in order to we need to have sentences, we need to have punctuation, we
Yeah.
can't just be run on, we need to work on this so that you can't write a story without sentences that
Yeah.
that aren't like all run on, or they just merge together. So a lot of times I'll give them examples of how to do that. We'll just kind of focus on that, like with a chapter,
Right.
something. Let's you know it, this is how, this is why this is a punctuation's needed here, and this is how we do the dialogue, and just things like that to try to help them to so that they can actually write, because right now they're basically just putting thoughts down on the paper. It's just sort of,
Yeah, it does become like that, doesn't it?
yeah. So it's more like, okay, now how do we take that thought and to make it into a sentence and a paragraph?
Right.
So I've worked with a couple of writers on that, where just kind of teaching them the mechanics of writing a sentence, and this is where the period goes, and
Yeah.
this is where the quotes go for dialogue, and the this is what a paragraph is, and that kind of thing. So there are some writers that I think some of them maybe just have like learning disabilities also, or
Hmm.
with reading, and they've just it's just not their strength, but they're
Right.
in both cases, they were very determined that they wanted to
That's cool.
write this story and publish this book, and they worked hard. I told
Yeah.
them, after we get done with this, you're going to have to hire a copy editor,
Right. Right. Right.
because especially because by that point, like I've worked on so many drafts with them that I start to know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
It's too hard to
yeah,
see.
but even then, at that point, there's still a lot of. At least I can. It's at a point where I can edit it, do some developmental editing and line it, like where I can follow the story. Like before, it was almost like just stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
I
You almost
can't even
you don't know where
follow
to
it.
start. Right.
So yeah, so in cases like that, it's basically like, you need to learn how to just focus on writing, turning those thoughts into paragraphs and sentences. So,
Right.
and it's going to be, and I'll be honest, it's going to be a lot of work. You have a lot to learn. And, even though I've edited this and I've run it through some pro writing and Grammarly, there's still a ton of errors, and I'm not a copy editor. It's just because
Yeah.
even when they get it to that point where it's a story and it's not, um, you can follow and everything, a lot of times there's still a lot of grammar errors and everything, because it's just not
Yeah.
their strength. So
Right. I mean, I grew up, you and I both grew up in a time, I think more grammar was taught in our time. Like I look at my kids and I'm like, how did you not learn this? I don't, I think it is boring to a lot of kids. And so, you know, I don't blame the teachers. They don't really want to like harp on something that nobody wants to learn. But I think you and I had that advantage of we kind of have that instinct on one hand, and yet still, it's amazing how many things slip by. You're like,
right,
how did I not notice that even with all the AI, with in AI meaning like pro writing aid or just like word, and Scrivener sort of giving you that squiggly line, It's amazing when you're reading it. You're like, oh, how is it possible that I don't have, closed quotes or a period or, just all these little things. So if you haven't really been taught grammar, maybe you just didn't pay attention because you were 9 and you'd rather play baseball outside,
Right.
like, so is that why you created a course for writers that you do you want to talk a little bit about why you created your first course, and we can talk about the other ones too, but do you
Yeah.
go into like that kind of basics?
Yeah. So after I'd been editing for a few years, I was just seeing that a lot of the writers, were making the same mistakes,
Mm,
same kinds of mistakes, and that I was like, I personalized every editorial letter, of course, but like I was copying like the parts from one letter to another, just like explaining why, like, what show don't tell is, or
mm.
or
That's a hard one for people though.
yeah, things like talking heads with dialogue. I would just paste, and give them resources. And then I kind of, one day I was just kind of reached a thought, like, why don't I just create a course that can be the resource instead of sending them to
Sure.
like 20 different websites and books and everything. Let me make a course out of all the mistakes I'm seeing, the most, because they're in every manuscript. Even like some more advanced writers who've been multi-published, a lot of times they'll make this similar kinds of mistakes, even though not to the same extent as a beginner, um, but I'll still see like with more advanced writers, it's a lot of times it's something like they're writing faster because they want to, they're on a deadline or something, because they want to send it to a publisher or agent, or they want to self-publish it. It's the next book in the series and they don't want to wait too long because readers just read the last book. So a lot of
Right.
times they're writing faster. Um, and it'll be something like a setting, like where they don't describe it, that they
Yeah,
have
because
the
they're
dialogue,
like
and
living it in their head, right? So they
yeah,
forget.
so it's just like fleshing out, or like the character, like why did she do this? What is she thinking here? So a lot of times with the more advanced authors, the story and the writing is flowing fine, but there's aspects of it that are confusing, or that are, or out of order because they've been redoing rewrites and everything and that kind of thing. Yeah.
I raised my hand because she
But it's very common. It's very common.
disclaimer, Stacy edits some of my books.
Yeah. So my first course, it's my most extensive course, my book editing blueprint. Um, so I have like all these modules. I think it's like 10 modules or 12 modules. I can't remember exactly, but each one covers one of those broad areas where I would see mistakes. So there's a module on like point of view, and getting deep into your characters, viewpoint, because a lot of times I'll see like stories where we don't know, we just never get into the characters' head, we never know what they're thinking, or if it's a,
Mhm.
if there's multi narrators, different chapters. It's that just all sounds the same, like the characters, it's lacking like that strong character voice, and sometimes
Mm,
there's head hopping and things like that. So I talk about that. And then there's, what's the theme, or like what's the main message of your story, like dialogue, how to write
yeah.
dialogue, how to show don't tell with description. And then it has like a section on line editing with the examples of line editing, and then a section on copy editing where which is basically the copy editing section is just an introduction to these are the most common types of mistakes I see. And if you have, if you have if the grammar and punctuation, this doesn't come naturally to you, you're probably going to need to do more
Yeah,
studying, or hire a copy editor. Because I always like recommend like Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly or something
of
like that.
course. But even
But
they can't
even
catch it
they
all.
don't, they do not catch everything. They clean it up, but a
Hmm.
lot of times I've run the scans with some authors, and caught a lot, but still a ton
It's
left
weird.
where I'll say you're going to have to hire a copy editor and a proofreader because there's still a lot you
Exactly.
didn't catch.
And you know what's unfair is like people don't really write grammatically correct these days, but when they read it, somehow your brain just knows that it's wrong and it really bothers the reader. And so a lot of times, if you don't catch the majority of them, like we'll say, readers will forgive one, two, like even in traditionally published books these days, I find one or two. But if you have more than that, watch out. Somebody's going to get mad and write a review of this is riddled with mistakes. And maybe they found five, but like whatever really gets them, like somehow it's so much easier to see it when it's not you who wrote the story. And, it feels
Yeah.
unfair,
And
but
a lot of times the reviewers will leave comments like this book needed an editor,
yeah,
and maybe it had an editor, but what they're seeing is just those
yeah,
grammar
just
mistakes and things that,
those stubborn.
yeah, you need someone to, like, developmental editing. And I think a lot of beginner writers don't realize this, that like developmental editing and line editing, that's just sort of like the first part of the editing process, but then you have to do the copy editing and proofreading. And it's usually not the same
Person.
editor that would do everything, um, that would do the developmental editing and like the proofreading,
Yeah.
because everyone has different expertise. And once you've worked on, like I said before, once you've worked on a story for a while, and gone through different drafts with the writer, you start to know it. So you're not the best person to proofread it, because it's like the author, what it's supposed to say.
Exactly. And that is one of the problems I think with writing. Um, I'll use my example now because you have read this one that I'm working on. Like you start moving things around. You have the story maybe in your head. One of my problems is I think the same as a lot of indie writers is you almost have the whole movie in your head, but you can't write the whole movie. Like you can't. That's really long, so I end up overwriting. Then I have to cut, as you have witnessed. Sometimes I cut and it's like, how did we go from here to here? Like what's going on? So when you're trying to write this out, and let's say somebody's listening to us like, okay, how do I, you know, know when my book is finished? Because I think one of the disservices we have in the indie author field is like we don't talk enough. We love hearing the interviews with the authors who are kind of beyond needing a lot of editing. If people like Katie Cross, I think, has been writing in her series for so long that she, the characters are fleshed out. She knows exactly who they are. She has her editor like that she pays. She has a copy editor. And so there's like this flow in this process that they just sort of know what they're doing.
Mhm.
And that's so different from what a kind of newish author. I mean, I have 5 books out, but I'm still in that place of like, okay, I really kind of want to make sure Stacy looks at this and make sure we're doing this right. But I think a lot of new writers are like, well, I should be able to do it like Katie Cross, not thinking she's got 12 years or something on you and 20 plus books, right? So at what point kind of like how many things should be figured out and fleshed out before they actually send the manuscript to someone like you? Because I think sometimes we think we finish the first draft and we send it off to the editor. I mean, I was guilty of that as a young, I mean, I wasn't that young, but a new writer, I'll say.
Yeah, I think I do have clients who are brand new to writing, and they haven't like really taken fiction writing courses or anything, and they just send it to me because they're not really on a tight budget. They have the money to spend on it, and they don't mind paying for a few rounds of editing, which could be a
Maybe it
few
feels more like
$1,000s.
coaching to them, yeah, like
Yeah, it
personal.
can be almost like, I've had some clients where it's almost like coaching, where we will go back with different drafts. But editing is expensive. So if an editor is reading like a manuscript a few different times, over
We're
time, by
talking
the time it's
thousands
done,
of dollars,
yeah, okay, right,
plural.
definitely, it could be a few $1,000s by the time they are ready to
Mhm.
start querying agents or whatever, because
Right.
they had so much private coaching. But a lot of authors are on a budget and they can't afford that, for a few $1,000s for, um, and then that's just with me with the developmental. And
Yeah.
they may still need to hire a copy editor or proof, depending what their skills are with that.
Right, right.
Um,
They
you
still
know,
need a cover, they still need a
yeah, I
purpose.
mean, either are they're going to be trying to get an agent, or they're going to be self-publishing, which there's all those other stuff like cover and all of that, the formatting, and marketing.
Mm,
So it's expensive. So that's why I created the book editing blueprint course, and then I branched out and created other courses, also like some smaller courses on different specific aspects of writing and editing, because a lot of writers are doing this on the side. They don't have like an unlimited budget to have like private one-on-one coaching with a rough
yeah.
draft and not having a lot of writing training. So I always recommend, like, so get your draft down, do the best of you can, and then while you're writing it, take some writing courses. And then I I recommend like my book editing blueprint course
Yeah.
or something, just some training on what editors are looking for and the biggest mistakes, that are going to brand you as an amateur,
Yeah.
so that you can get it as strong as possible before you hire an editor. And there's going to be a point where you've done everything to it that you can't think of. You
That
followed
you
all of
could
that,
do.
and there's nothing else that you kind of hit a wall. But like, okay, I've gone through. I've kind of worked on my point of view. I've worked on dialogue and show don't tell and grammar. I did the best I could on the grammar, ran it through things, and line editing. I went and cut some of my crutch words, and I did all of
Yeah.
these things, and I don't know what else to do with it. That's when it's like time to hire an editor, so they can help you. And even by that point, if you were doing it sort of on your own and taking courses and everything, it's helpful to get that feedback because they can tell you how well you're implementing what you've learned and what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are.
I agree.
They can help you take it to another level.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
but if you send it to them too early, again, it gets expensive because they can't really do that much editing on a
Hmm.
manuscript that has all these basic flaws, like with your scenes are lacking setting, your character doesn't I don't really know what your character wants or what the arc is.
Right.
I don't we're not getting into your character's head and everything. There's just so many things that
Right.
are kind of like, again, it's almost like the private coaching, like telling them how to write. This is how we, that, and that's why my editorial letter and my notes in the manuscript would be a lot of basically telling them how to write. This is an example of where you're telling and not
Right.
showing, and this is how if this is of how I would handle that, or this is, do you see how in this scene there's no, it's all dialogue. We don't know whose head we're in. We don't know who's, so it's that, a lot of times it's that kind of thing, just educating them about how to write. And it can't really comment too much on the
On the
story
story.
because, I mean, you can basically telling them what's missing. Yeah, there's no character arc. There's no, you
Right.
know,
Right.
there's plot point, it's all internal. We don't have enough plot points and things like that. But it's more kind of, it's not like with a more advanced writer where we can just kind of, they know all that, they still may need to be reminded of it at times, like, hey, in this scene we kind of lost track of the narrator getting her head more, or why did she say that, or this scene could, this is one of your big scenes, you could use more conflict. It's at that
Hmm.
point, so you see how it's like more, the feedback's more on the story, commenting and how to make the story better, whereas
Hmm.
with like a beginner writer who, it's more about how to make the writing better, you know
Right. Oh,
so
that's interesting. Like
I mean,
it,
it's, yeah, and at some point, line editing makes the writing better also, but that's sort of like after the developmental editing with, but basically I can do more real developmental editing and commenting on the story and everything, and more line editing with a manuscript that's further along, whereas with the manuscript that's, you know, uh,
that's a good point though. You get
yeah,
like more bang for your buck from
exactly,
a developmental editor if
right,
you. So your course, um, it's almost like I would use it. I use it more like a checklist. Like I get the whole thing done, and then before I edit it, although this last time was a little bit of a difference, I just got desperate and was like, I sent it off to Stacy and was like, please tell me all the things that need to be fixed. But I've used it before on Coffee Stains. I use it on Bended Loyalty, like a checklist to go through, because I think for my brain it's easier to like write the story and then take one of the modules and be like, oh, that's right, I need to look for my crutch words. So then
right,
I gotta search for those crutch words and
Yeah.
then it's always like, oh, why did I use that word like 5 times on one page? Like, it's really interesting. What's wonderful is like Pro Writing Aid will find it for you, right? And then you have to go through, and it's actually a really satisfying exercise where you no longer have to think about the story. You can really focus on just like using your vocabulary and it's strengthening your sentences, right? And like trying to pull those out. But your course is a great checklist to remember all the things that are kind of like those final instances. The
Right.
story's done, but I need to let's see how many times I use the word feel or felt.
Yeah. So like I have a checklist. I think it's the 26-page checklist that goes through everything that was in the course. So it's like I recommend like going through the course first. It can be you don't have to have a finished manuscript. It could be you could be still writing it, and this will
Okay.
kind of help you figure out if you're on track or where you might, it'll give you a heads up of what you need to work on.
And help you
Um,
get through, yeah,
to help
depending
you,
on where you are.
yeah. And then at the end of it, there's this checklist that you can use like for any book you write, where it just kind of reminds
I
you
love
of
it.
all these things. And then if you need to refresh your memory on something, or something that's like a weakness, you can go back to read more examples. And then there's like it's like a workbook where as you go through the course you evaluate. Like I don't have them edit while they're writing the book, or I don't recommend actually implementing the edits until they've gone through the whole course,
Mm,
because then they might never finish the course. They'll
yeah,
just get so.
yeah.
It's better to evaluate. So I basically guide them through writing their own editorial letter, as if teaching them to think like an editor. And then by the time they finish this workbook, it will have evaluated their manuscript in each of these areas. And then there's some like quizzes and like practice things where they can kind of practice, test their skills on like different aspects of editing. Um,
But the way that you talk is like, it's normal for a book then to take longer than a month to write. I have a
yes.
little bit of a stickler on the indie, because again, there are people who can write really quickly, but it's usually people who have been writing and understand their genre, they understand storytelling, and still, you can
And I
talk
have
about.
like, yeah, I have work with clients like that where they have like 20, 25 books self-published, and they're on that deadline where they're trying to get get a book out every couple months or whatever
It's
for different
crazy.
holidays. And they're good at like getting this basic story down, but it's filling it in and fleshing out. And that's where they need an editor. Basically, they send a manuscript that's well written, but it doesn't have all the meat to it yet a lot of times. So they
Mm.
just need to, like, this scene, there's no description. We could flesh this out, or I can't pick
They
this.
need you to like mark it, right?
Yeah, they just need me to, go through and be like, to remind them, because they're just so focused on deadlines, and then, they're trying to outline their next book, and,
Yeah.
so a lot of times they will, even though they know better, they know that,
Mhm, of
that
course.
they're at a point where they're, again, maybe the money isn't as much of an issue because they've got 20 books that are doing pretty well,
Right.
and they're having money coming in, and they want to focus on the next one. So they're like, okay, I'm going to send it to Stacy and have her, or send it to my editor, and just have, instead of me like figuring out like what's going through the course and the checklist, I'm just going to send
Right.
it, have her do it
Yep.
because it's faster, because I can work on the next book, and then they can implement the advice very easily because they
And
know.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's how they're running their business. I mean, but I think this is really important to to make sure the newer writers know that, right? Like there's absolutely nothing wrong. I talk all the time about we should get outside help. We should get editors. Like you can see stuff when I send you a short story or a book, like you see things differently. You have different questions that make me as a writer go, "Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah, I should do that." It's really I think it's almost impossible to do that by yourself. There are some people that are just so talented at it that maybe they can do it. But as writers, we really need someone else to be looking at that and to find those things. And I don't really understand that as the reader, like, when is this? From little things like you called him Rick before and now he's Bob. That's my problem a lot of times too, like actual like who's talking and what are we doing here? But it's important for people to understand, like even in the business of indie publishing, sometimes the whole business structure is I write out the majority of, like, I write the story, and then the editor is the one that makes sure that they're filling it all in. And this is just the process that they do. I think a lot of writers think that these writers who are so prolific are doing everything themselves.
Right,
I don't
definitely.
think they are.
No, I don't think so. Because if they were, the
That'd be insane.
well, the reviews would, they wouldn't be as the reviews would say that, like, this book didn't have any editing, or they wouldn't,
Right.
probably wouldn't be at a point where they have like 20 books um that are doing well, and they can,
Yeah, with four
that's
and a
their
half
main
stars.
job, and they can afford to, like, give their editor a manuscript that's not as developed as it could be,
Yeah.
because they feel it's more cost effective for them to be working on the next book,
Right.
and
They're
then
the
they'll just,
storyteller. They're like
right,
they're
and then,
getting the
yeah,
story out.
and
And
then they'll be like, oh yeah, yeah, this is right, yeah, I agree with this, and then they can implement the
right,
feedback a lot quicker than a
right.
beginner writer, where a beginner writer might take multiple drafts going back and
Yes.
forth with the editor because they're still learning. But we get this more experienced writer, and they can just implement it a lot faster.
Right.
So,
Yeah, they get it. Like, and it's good to know that, because if you are a beginning writer, even like, again, first, second, third, fourth book, it kind of depends on where, how much you knew before, right? I think sometimes we can feel very overwhelmed thinking we should be going faster or we should be like, I'm not a very fast writer, so I think I have a lot of sympathy for writers who are like, I feel like I should, I should get more books out. It's like, well, do you want a well-written book, like a book that you're proud of? Because one thing that stands out to me is a story I read on Threads, but of a young writer. She seemed like wrote a story she was proud of, but she didn't get any editing on it, and created this really beautiful book. I mean, these days people can create such beautiful covers, and the premise of the story, I guess, was good. But once it went out to ARC readers, all the reviews came back pretty negative. And that's devastating, right? Like, you think that you're doing, and I wonder sometimes if she kind of thought that because all of her hero writers aren't really getting, spending too much time on their books, that because she's a good storyteller or has this story, that equates to good writer and getting everything right for the reader, right? There are like different stages that require different knowledge to put a book together.
right, and a lot of times those favorite writers you have, that it seems like they're writing book after book, and it's so easy for them. What was it like before they got that first book published? You don't know these overnight successes. Are
Yes.
they really an overnight success?
Yes. Yes. Colleen Hoover was not an overnight success. And even still, like, I was surprised that whoever published her traditionally, I was surprised that they actually didn't edit the book. If you look at it, like, I guess because it was so popular, edited however she had edited. But yeah, I think that we should talk a lot more about overnight success is not a real thing.
No.
And I think a lot of people who might have been overnight successes 12 years ago, the reader world has changed a lot since then. Like, remember when the Kindle came out? I was so hungry for books on my Kindle that as long as a story was good, I don't remember caring a lot about the grammar. I mean, sometimes it would even download funny. So you're like, is it the writer? Is it the format? I don't know. But that's not how that is anymore. You have traditional published books on the Kindle now. You have, these Kickstarters and whatever. And like, you have Book Talk. You have, what's it called on Instagram? Instagram books. I don't
Yeah, I know.
know.
Books for
Book Talk is
Instagram.
a
Yeah,
lot easier to say
it's
than
just, yeah. There's just so
Insta
many
Talk.
places to.
But they're talking hardcore about the books and like really critiquing them.
Right.
So your book could tank all your hard work. Like, I just kind of want to like hug all the new writers and be like, listen, people are not kind to people that they don't know you.
Right.
And if you ask for an honest review, you're going to get an honest review. Please take
Yeah.
Stacy's course before you.
Even when you, even another thing I think they don't realize is, even let's say they sent a manuscript, this writer who's now a best-selling writer of movies being made of books and everything, but when they first got that book, they had a book that was strong enough to catch catch an
Mm,
agent's attention and catch a publisher's attention, but that doesn't it's very unlikely that that book didn't go through heavy editing there, and a lot of times it's just a really, like these writers that before they had so much, like just having to learn the craft and everything, then you sell the book, and then you reach this next level, which is very overwhelming, like, oh my gosh,
so true.
I just got this editorial letter from the publisher, and they're going to buy the book, but I have to make all these edits first, and it's
Yes.
that happened to me with my first published book, which if I was a teenager at the time, because I had won a contest for teenage
Yeah, you were
writers, and
so
then
young.
yeah, I was like 18, and then but it was published by Avon Books, because it was a competition where the winning book got published, and I was like so excited and everything. But then I got this like 10-page editorial letter back with all the things to
That
change.
you
I
had
was
to
like, oh my god, I was kind of like hyperventilating, like, oh my god, how am I going to do this? Oh my god, how am I gonna...
Yeah.
And I
That's
think
so
that,
interesting that you won the contest with that story, but it still was not up to like
right.
ready
So
for publishing. It was,
you I think the goal, like if you're trying to get an agent, and you're not self-publishing. So if you're self-publishing, obviously you want to make the book as strong as possible. And again, the same thing with an agent, because they have this slush pile of, that's what
yeah,
they
they
call
do.
the slush pile of manuscripts. They have so many, and you have to stand out. But like I've had some clients where I've gone back and forth with them. They really want to get an agent, be traditionally published, and we'll maybe 3 or 4 times we'll go back and forth with the manuscript, and then it reaches a point where, like, okay, I think as long as you proofread it and make, and just go through it and proofread it and make, because you've made a lot of changes here, I think it's ready to try to send out queries, but be prepared that once an agent takes it on, they may have you do more rewrites, um, because basically
Yeah.
the goal here is to get it as strong as possible so that it captures somebody's attention. But then they may want to put their own spin on it, because they know this, they have these contacts editors, that, and they know this editor is, has this, like, books to be edgier. They know this, that, this is
Right.
what this publisher is publishing, and they're going to want the female narrator to be more, spunky, or they're going to want a little more romance in it. So the agent may have you make some changes before they even start sending it to publishers. And then if you get a publisher that's really interested in it, they may not accept it, right? They may say, we really like it, but, you know, um, they may reject it outright, and not be interested in it again. Or they could say, I'd be interested in reading a rewrite, but it needs, these are some things that I think it needs before we can take
Yeah.
it to the next level.
It can
So
be a lot.
it's a lot. So I don't think that people realize that. They think that just once a book is sold, it's like,
Yeah.
that was easy for that author, but
It's
it was
easy
probably
street
the author.
then.
Yeah, probably the author was like, get this letter back, or like, oh god, I have to rewrite it again, and then they're gonna rewrite for the agent, then they're gonna rewrite it for the publisher, and then the
Yeah.
pub
I mean,
committee
10
thinks you should do this.
pages, 10 pages of rewrite thoughts is a lot of
Yeah,
thoughts on your book that that's it feels really personal, right? Too. So you have
yeah,
to navigate that emotion. I always tell people it's better to navigate the emotion with feedback from an editor than just reading reviews online.
editors are a lot nicer. They
Yes,
have a
they
way
are
of like,
because they want your
yeah,
relationship.
and they can tell you more, like give you ideas of how to solve the problem. I mean, a good editor, I think, won't just say fix the scene. They'll be like, here's some things you could do to fix the scene. Whereas, the person in a bad mood who's reviewing a book in Amazon is going to, like, 2 stars. This is stupid. This is
Couldn't keep
more.
my attention. You're
Yeah.
like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. I'm like, right. What do I do with that?
Like, is it because you're in a crappy mood or is it because the story's no good? Like,
And I
oh,
think sometimes even the best books, if you go, when you're depressed, when you're feeling overwhelmed and like you can't do this, go read the reviews on Amazon for even the
unlike
best
the
selling books.
bestsellers.
Go read the 1-star reviews. They're still gonna get some negative reviews, or you're gonna get the people who are just in bad moods. Like, I thought this was a mystery.
I know. You're like, at what point?
you know, because they didn't remember what they bought. They downloaded it and they like, oh, I thought this, I'm gonna give this 1 star because I was expecting a mystery, because
Oh my God. It's lovely to read
yeah,
some, or like your favorite books or the bestsellers and be like, it's literally 50-50. Like
yeah,
you seriously can't please everyone. But
right. You're
so
trying to please your target audience. You know who your target audience is. You're trying to
yeah.
write for them, and
Yes.
um,
Yes. Which goes into like a whole different part of being an author, is that finding your target audience, which is like that's so, for some people, for some books, I think it's quite difficult to do, or just as your first book, you know. I remember hearing about that with my first book, but yeah, I was just so overwhelmed with getting the book done. And then you take a break because the book's like on its way out and you go, oh wait, now I have to go find the target audience. Like like your work is never done, basically.
I know. So a lot of times, like you kind of had. It's a good idea to take a look at the book categories, like on
Mm-hmm.
Amazon, or so you kind of know what categories there are. I was just we're doing this with one of my clients the other day, who was writing a memoir, and we were kind of trying to figure out like who are you writing this for? Like what is your
Yeah.
like not just people who write who enjoy memoirs or like no, like what category, what
Right.
categories do you, of people, and then go look at, so we went and looked at some of the categories, and then okay, maybe go check out some of their books and how are they writing their blurbs, and what kind of
Mm-hmm.
reviews do they get. It's just so you kind of have a better idea of where your book would fit. um so you could
Yes,
kind of market it that way also, or read some of them and see, there's some of the
exactly.
most popular ones that are doing well, and just to kind of get a feel for how those authors are writing them. And
Oh my gosh, it's so much. Well, at least Amazon has a little bit more, has more niches now, and there's so much software out there that can help you, with Publisher Rocket or whatever. It is a little bit easier than when when I started out and when you started out way before me, where you're just like, go look. It
yes,
was like it was like mystery, romance, and then
right.
fiction. You're just like, that encompasses millions of people. We want to niche it down, So it is getting a little bit easier, I think. But before we just go, I mean, I think we could talk about editing for a long time, but more than anything, where can people find you in this fabulous um, course, so that they can, maybe they're thinking like, oh, maybe I should give my novel one more pass before I send it off.
They can go to shortcutsforwriters.com, and I have a few freebies. Like one of them is a on-demand masterclass, just to kind of talking about self-editing and what to expect when you work with an editor.
Mm.
And that talks about, it gives more information on book editing blueprint. I have a free looks and gazes guide that kind of talk, because I have a whole class
I
devoted to,
highly recommend that
yeah,
guide.
the
Highly
energizing
recommend it.
writing toolkit, which is on nonverbal communication and body language. So I have a free looks and gazes guide, which has like 100 different ways to express like a look or a
Yes.
gaze, because that's the number one most overused word I see is look. If you do one thing right now,
You looked at
go look
her.
at
You
your
looked at
manuscript and
him.
see how often you're using it.
Oh, I have to do it every single
Yeah.
time. And I think it's because sometimes it's just a placeholder, right? Like you might even know, like I know intellectually I should find, but sometimes you're just like, okay, the story's coming, I have this much time, placeholder, right? So you have to get this. It's wonderful to have your guides where you can again use it as a checklist. Go search for that word, look. You'll find it in so many places in your manuscript. It's terrible.
Yes,
It's
definitely.
terrible. I highly recommend. I recommend you as an editorial developmental editor as well. You've helped me a lot in my books. But your course, especially if people are on a budget, or maybe they're just starting out, um, or maybe they really think they can go it without an editor, I still recommend your course.
Yeah,
Make sure
and I have
it's
some
strong.
smaller ones too to start with. Like I have the Energizer Writing Toolkit, then I have the Inside Voices one, which you helped me
That's
inspire
great.
that course. It originally started as a workshop for you. But that talks about like the internal dialogue and how to
Yeah,
balance that, like what the character is thinking, so we know their motivation, how to balance that with the action and how much is too much and how much is too little, and
because there's
you
nothing
know,
worse than too much internal dialogue,
right.
in
And
my opinion. that's,
that's
that's my number one reason for DNFing, especially an audiobook. She is talking too much.
yeah, just, what is she thinking? You know, we know what she's thinking, like, but you something, nothing's happened for the,
And usually it's a repetition.
yeah.
I think the author forgets that they've already said it, or I don't know. And it's not something that I do. I have my weaknesses as well, but yeah, especially inside, like when you're really deep character or first person, I find that a lot where it's just like too much. So I highly recommend that one as well. You have an organizational one,
Yeah,
which
I have so I have like a course on plot, perfect your plot, which is more like on most common plot mistakes I see. And then I have the organized author, which is like if if for a lot of people, a lot of writers, the writing is just they have to balance it into, they have a goal that they want to make a living from writers, or just, maybe it's just to get publish one book, but they have to finish it and fit it into their regular life with job and family, and it can be overwhelming. So the organized author and talks about how to fit writing into your life and how to just kind of
yeah,
streamline, how to come up with different systems for your writing and your book marketing and your personal life, and just to kind of so that you can get more done and be more efficient.
you can focus when
Focus,
you're
you can focus.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. It's so needed. And then your tarot card, is that mostly for inspirational writing, like writing prompts, or what is the tarot card one?
Yeah, I have oracle cards for writers. I have
Oracle
oracle
cards.
cards for writers and the Writer's Muse Journal, which both use oracle cards or tarot cards, and it's kind of, how like they have like writing prompts where you can
Mhm.
you just you read like a prompt and then you just kind of go start writing. With this, you pick a card or pick a few cards and use that to help inspire you. You can pick it for like, you're stuck with, if you have it like writer's block, you're stuck on your character or what your character wants, or you want to know more about your character, you can pick a couple of cards and just free write and see if anything comes to you. If maybe it might be something and the
That can
image,
be
like
really helpful
symbolism.
sometimes.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I always like to say that it's like in your mind there's like this database of
Yes,
stuff that's thoughts and memories, and that aren't at the forefront, and maybe it's something in this picture on the card, or maybe it's one word from the guidebook, or something, or that just triggers something. It reminds you of
yeah.
something, that you might be able to apply to your book. It's just sort of a way, some people go to AI and try to brainstorm. This is another
Hmm.
way of brainstorming, but it's sort of like, looking within yourself to see
Yeah.
what it might trigger. And
Yeah, because we're not always like only thinking about our book. Most people have a full life, maybe full-time job, and so sometimes it's hard to access that point.
and then you
You're
can,
right.
yeah, and you can also use cards for like it's like personal, just for you can for like personal development and growth, because I
Mm,
think a lot of writers may have like imposter syndrome, like,
yes.
is my book good enough, or if is anybody gonna want to read it, what if it gets bad reviews, what's my family
Hmm.
gonna think of it, it, even if I did sell it, or a publisher wanted it or something, and then they want me to do rewrites. Am I going to? Can I handle that? Am I good enough? I think
Yes.
a lot of writers just have this: am I good enough, or or I'm overwhelmed trying to fit it all in. So cards can also help you with your personal development, and just the messages are usually very positive, and just kind of
Hmm.
you can pull a card a day, and take something from it. And so it's just like another way of trying to feed your mind with positive thoughts
Yes.
and
Good mental
affirmations.
health.
Yeah, especially nowadays.
It's seriously, and it's a it's a field in which a lot of people have lots of opinions and they're very willing to give them. And so you got to be,
You have to have a tough skin, a thick skin.
yes,
It's,
yes.
you
Because on one hand you want the reception, and on the other hand it's scary.
Right. Even with that, I have had clients tell me like, I can't wait to see what you think, but I'm terrified.
I'm terrified.
I'm terrified to read the letter. Or, or you publish your book and it's on Amazon and it's so exciting, like checking the reviews, like it's like, oh no, if it's a new review, and then it's even now I get a review and I see there's a new review in a book. I'm like, okay.
I know. Well,
Your review is
which
about
way is it gonna go?
yeah, and you have to have that thick skin because you're not,
Yeah.
no matter how strong your book is, how good your book is, you can't please everyone. One book isn't for every person, and it's also kind of
Someone will hate it.
subjective, right? It's all subjective, and you just
Yeah.
gotta do the
Keep
best you can, write the best book you can.
which is why you got to keep your mental health and any positivity that you can do to sort of release you of that overwhelm and of that stress is going to be good for you.
Right.
And it's going to help you write the next book instead of being like give up, so
Yeah,
we don't
because you
want
don't
you to
want,
give up.
there's enough, I don't want to say obstacles, but being a published author, it's a lot of hard work, and you have enough to focus on without self-sabotaging yourself.
So true.
Because the
That
ones
is so
who
true.
the ones who persevere are the ones who accomplish the goals. If you're going to self-sabotage yourself, you're never going to get,
Yeah,
you know, to
that's
where you want to be.
exactly. So we're going to have the links to shortcuts for writers. They can pretty much find everything there, right?
Yeah.
All right, we'll have the links. Thanks for coming on again. I know that I have you on like I think every year. I love chatting with you. And I think editing and self-editing and that whole process is something that people are constantly needing to learn, right? Like the new writers, even us middle of the road writers, just being reminded of all those things. So thanks, Stacy, for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.